The U.S. and Iran trading new threats around the Strait of Hormuz, sending gas prices skyrocketing.
Tornadoes, wildfires, a blood-red moon, an earthquake, dead sea creatures by the thousands, all within days of each other. Separately, each one has an explanation. Together, they form something that scientists have no single answer for. And buried inside ancient scripture, written thousands of years ago, is a description that matches this moment almost word for word. Stay with this, because what comes next changes how you see everything that has been happening. Across multiple states, the atmosphere shifted in ways forecasters did not predict. Communities that survived one disaster faced another within hours. The sky looked wrong, the ocean behaved strangely, and people who never thought about prophecy before started asking questions they could not ignore. This is not about fear, this is about patterns, and what those patterns might mean. It started in Oklahoma. The first wave of tornadoes had already passed. Recovery crews were clearing highways. Families were returning to damaged homes. Weather reports said the worst was over. The systems were supposed to move east and weaken. That is not what happened. Instead, the atmosphere began reorganizing. High above the ground, warm, moisture-laden air from the Gulf kept feeding energy into the clouds. Radar screens showed something meteorologists recognize but rarely see twice in the same week. The conditions were rebuilding. By late afternoon, rotation appeared again. Not in one location, in several. Witnesses across 3 states described the same moment. The air went still. Then came the sound. A low, distant roar that survivors recognized immediately. Others only understood when they saw the funnels forming. Multiple tornadoes touched down, across land that had just been hit days earlier. Roads that were being repaired were destroyed again. Homes that had been marked for cleanup were flattened completely. What unsettled people was not just the destruction, it was the timing. Scientists explained it clearly. Atmospheric instability had persisted longer than models predicted. Warm air continued colliding with cold fronts. The ingredients for severe weather remained in place. The science is solid. But for families standing in the rubble of their neighborhoods for the second time in 1 week, the science felt incomplete. One woman interviewed by local news said something that spread across social media within hours. She said it felt like the sky was not finished with them yet. In the Bible, the book of Job describes something similar. It says the tempest comes out from its chamber. The image is striking. Storms do not just form randomly. They emerge from places beyond human control. They arrive with power that humbles even the strongest structures. And sometimes, they arrive more than once. As crews worked through the night, another question began forming. If the atmosphere could reorganize this quickly, what else might be building that forecasts are missing? The pattern had started, but nobody realized it yet. Because while the winds were tearing through the central states, something else was beginning on the opposite side of the country. In California, the air was dry. Humidity levels had dropped to dangerous lows. And in the hills outside Los Angeles, the first spark appeared. What happened next would create a phenomenon that even veteran firefighters said they had never seen at this scale. Fire does not normally behave like wind. It does not usually form columns that spin. But under the right conditions, heat and air can merge into something that operates by different rules. And those rules were about to rewrite what people thought was possible. The fire started small, a single ignition point in dry brush near the foothills. Within 2 hours, it had consumed thousands of acres. The spread was not gradual, it was explosive. Flames moved across hillsides faster than vehicles could drive. Smoke rose in columns so thick, they created their own weather patterns. And then, the wind shifted. Not the wind outside the fire, the wind created by the fire itself. When a wildfire burns hot enough, it pulls air inward from every direction. That air rushes toward the flames, feeding them, making them hotter. As the heat rises, it forms a vertical column. If the conditions align, that column begins to rotate. What forms is a fire tornado. a spinning vortex of flames that can reach hundreds of feet into the air. It moves unpredictably. It throws burning debris across distances that fire breaks cannot stop, and it turns containment strategies into guesswork. Firefighters on the ground reported seeing multiple fire tornadoes forming simultaneously. Some lasted only seconds, others persisted for minutes, carving paths through neighborhoods that had no time to evacuate. The footage that emerged showed something almost unreal. Spirals of fire twisting against black smoke, embers raining down miles away from the fire line, streets glowing orange as ash fell like snow. Meteorologists explained the phenomenon. It is called a fire whirl. It happens when extreme heat creates enough rotational energy to form a vortex. The science has been documented. It is rare, but not impossible. Yet the scale of what happened in California went beyond textbook examples. Some of these fire tornadoes registered wind speeds comparable to EF1 tornadoes. They uprooted trees. They peeled roofs off structures. They moved with enough force to shift vehicles. For residents watching their neighborhoods burn, the explanations did not reduce the shock. One firefighter said later that it felt like the land itself was fighting back. And while the fires raged, questions about preparedness began surfacing. Evacuation orders in some areas came late. Emergency alerts were inconsistent. Resources were stretched thin before the flames even started. Critics pointed to years of budget cuts. Others highlighted delayed forest management. The blame spread in multiple directions, but the fire did not wait for answers. It kept moving. In the Bible, fire carries layered meaning. It represents judgment. It represents purification. In Isaiah, it appears as a force that reveals the seriousness of imbalance. Fire consumes what is dry, but it also clears ground for new growth. After the flames pass, forests often regenerate. What looks like total destruction can become the beginning of renewal. But standing in the ash, renewal feels distant. What feels immediate is loss. And as the fires in California began to slow, another event was already forming. This time, not on land. This time, in the water. Along the coastline, early morning walkers noticed something wrong. At first, it was just a few fish near the waterline. Then, more appeared. Within hours, entire stretches of beach were covered. Thousands of fish, crabs, starfish, larger marine creatures that should never be this close to shore, all of them lifeless. The water itself looked different. Instead of the familiar dark blue, sections of the ocean appeared pale and cloudy. Foam gathered along the waves in strange white clusters. Some witnesses said it looked like the sea was boiling from below. Scientists who studied the scene pointed to oxygen depletion. When ocean temperatures rise beyond normal levels, water holds less oxygen. For marine life, that drop can turn the ocean deadly almost overnight. The creatures do not swim toward the beach by choice. They come because they are trying to survive. But survival did not come. Images spread quickly online. Drone footage showed long stretches of sand scattered with sea life. The silence in those videos felt unnatural. Waves rolled in and out, but there was no movement beneath the surface. One fisherman standing near the shoreline said something that resonated with thousands who saw the clip. He said, "The ocean feels like it is dying." For some, the scene stirred words from the Old Testament. The book of Hosea describes a time when the land mourns and the fish of the sea are taken away. The passage does not claim that every marine die-off is a divine sign, but it acknowledges a connection between the health of creation and the choices of humanity. The event was not isolated to one beach. Reports came in from multiple coastal areas. In some places, cleanup crews filled trucks with dead sea life. In others, the tide carried them back out, leaving only the smell behind. Marine biologists continued testing water samples. They tracked temperature patterns. They measured oxygen levels and checked for algae blooms. The data would take time to process fully, but the visible impact was immediate. Residents who had lived near the ocean their entire lives said they had never seen anything like it. The coast had always felt stable, reliable. Now, it felt fragile. And while crews worked to clear the beaches, attention began shifting upward. Because the next change did not happen on the ground or in the water, it happened in the sky, and what people saw there would be harder to explain. It started after dark. Security cameras across several cities captured something unusual, faint streaks of light flickering through the clouds. At first, they looked like distant lightning, but the colors were wrong. Thin pulses of blue and violet rippling across the horizon. The flashes did not come with thunder. They did not follow storm patterns. They appeared scattered, silent, and brief. Footage surfaced from Los Angeles first. Then similar recordings appeared from other states. In some clips, the lights seemed to spread slowly through the clouds like electrical veins. Then came the moon. Across social media, people began posting images of an unusually deep red moon rising above cities. The color was darker than most remembered seeing, a crimson glow hanging low in the sky. From Washington, D.C., photographers captured it above the monuments. In Chicago, it appeared between skyscrapers, reflected faintly in glass facades. For a moment, people paused. Some admired it. Others felt uneasy. The red moon is not supernatural. It happens when the moon rises through thick layers of atmosphere. Dust, humidity, and particles scatter light, filtering out blue wavelengths and leaving red. The effect intensifies near the horizon. It is optics. It is measurable. But timing shapes perception. When strange lights appear in the sky, and the moon rises blood red on the same night, people connect the images. They do not do it because science has failed. They do it because patterns feel significant. Throughout history, celestial events have carried meaning. In ancient texts, changes in the sky often preceded changes on earth. The book of Joel describes the sun turning dark and the moon appearing as blood. The book of Revelation mentions a great earthquake and the moon becoming as blood. These passages have been interpreted many ways. They are symbolic, layered, debated. But the language has stayed in cultural memory, and when the ground moved hours later, that memory sharpened. Without warning, the earth began to shake. Buildings trembled. Windows rattled. Streetlights swayed as shock waves rolled through neighborhoods. Alarms sounded. Residents rushed outside, unsure how strong the shaking would become. Within minutes, reports confirmed it. A significant earthquake had struck. The timing was impossible to ignore. Strange lights. A red moon. Then the ground moved. Each event had a scientific explanation, but together they formed something that felt like more than coincidence. The earthquake measured significant enough to rattle infrastructure across a wide area. It was not catastrophic, but it was felt. In homes, objects fell from shelves. In offices, ceiling tiles shifted. Along highways, drivers pulled over as the pavement seemed to roll beneath them. Seismologists recorded the data immediately. The quake originated from a known fault line. Tectonic plates had been building pressure for years. The release was expected eventually. This was geology operating exactly as science predicts. Yet for people who had just watched the sky behave strangely, the earthquake felt connected. The mind does not separate events easily when they happen close together. A red moon, strange lights, and then the earth shakes. The sequence creates weight. In Scripture, earthquakes appear frequently during moments of transition. When Jesus died, the ground shook and rocks split. In the book of Revelation, earthquakes accompany the opening of seals and the pouring of bowls. The imagery is not random. Throughout the Bible, the shaking of the earth represents something deeper than geology. It represents the shaking of foundations. Not just physical ground, but systems, beliefs, certainties. When the earth moves, humanity is reminded that stability is conditional, that what feels permanent can shift suddenly. The earthquake passed within seconds, but its psychological impact lasted longer. Social media filled with speculation. Some dismissed it as routine seismic activity, others saw it as part of a larger pattern. And that pattern was growing harder to ignore. Tornadoes that returned when they should have stopped. Fires that spun into the air. An ocean that pushed thousands of dead creatures onto shore. A sky that flashed with unexplained lights. A blood-red moon. And now, the ground shaking beneath it all. Individually, each event fits within natural processes. Together, they created a narrative that felt deliberate. As cleanup began and aftershocks were monitored, another question emerged. If the atmosphere, the land, the ocean, and the earth itself were all showing signs of instability within the same narrow window of time, what else might be coming? The answer would arrive from a place most people never look: the deep ocean, where creatures that live in total darkness were about to surface in ways that defied normal behavior. Fishermen off the coast of California began reporting sightings that made no sense. Species that live thousands of feet below the surface were appearing in shallow water. Oarfish, long and silver, drifted near the surface. Deep-sea anglerfish, rarely seen alive, washed onto beaches. Bioluminescent organisms pulsed faintly in daylight, stranded in tide pools. These creatures exist in a world of total darkness and crushing pressure. They do not come to the surface unless something forces them. Marine biologists offered explanations: shifts in deep ocean currents, changes in water temperature at depth, possible seismic activity on the ocean floor disturbing their habitat. When deep layers are disrupted, creatures adapted to stability become disoriented. Some cannot survive the journey upward. The science is established. Deep-sea ecosystems are sensitive to environmental changes, but the timing unsettled observers. The ocean had already pushed thousands of dead fish onto shore. Now, it was revealing species that most people only see in documentaries. The boundary between the hidden and the visible felt thinner. For some, the imagery carried symbolic weight. The Bible describes the ocean as vast and full of creatures beyond number. Psalm 104 acknowledges the immense life contained in the sea, most of it unseen. The verse does not suggest that unusual sightings are prophetic, but it recognizes that the ocean holds mysteries beyond human sight. When those mysteries surface unexpectedly, it prompts reflection. Residents walking the beaches described the experience as surreal. Creatures from the deep lying in shallow water under open sky. The contrast was stark. What belongs in darkness, now exposed to light. What should remain hidden, now visible. Scientists continued monitoring offshore conditions. They analyzed water samples and tracked temperature shifts. Most likely, a combination of natural forces brought deep-sea life closer to land. Rare does not mean impossible. But for those standing on California beaches that week, the experience layered onto everything else. First, the water rose. Then, the hillsides fell. Now, the deep surfaced. The pattern continued to build. And just when it seemed the ocean had revealed its strangest behavior, something happened that defied easy categorization. Witnesses described a beam of light descending from the sky and touching the water. Where it made contact, a ring of fire formed on the surface of the ocean, and it burned. It happened just after sunset, off the coast near Long Beach. Multiple witnesses reported seeing a concentrated beam of light descending from the night sky. It was not lightning. There was no storm. The light appeared vertical, focused, almost like a spotlight touching the ocean surface. Then the water began to glow. A circular shape formed where the beam made contact. The glow intensified, outlining a perfect ring. Moments later, flames appeared. Low at first, then rising. A ring of fire on the water itself. It did not spread outward like an oil fire. It held its shape, circular, contained, burning against the dark Pacific. Boats in the area slowed. People on the beach stood frozen. The flames persisted for several minutes before fading. No explosion followed, no wreckage appeared. The ring simply burned and then disappeared. Explanations were offered quickly. Methane release from the ocean floor could ignite if sparked. Bioluminescence combined with reflection might create the illusion of fire. Electrical discharge from atmospheric conditions could interact with surface gases. Each explanation addressed part of what was seen, but none fully captured the strangeness of a perfect ring of fire floating on the ocean while a beam of light descended from above. For some observers, the image stirred ancient descriptions. Ezekiel's vision included wheels of fire and lights descending. Revelation describes signs in the heavens and wonders on the earth. blood and fire and vapor of smoke. The language is symbolic, apocalyptic, meant to convey moments when the natural order appears disrupted. Whether the ring of fire was methane or something else, it added to the growing list, tornadoes returning when they should have stopped, fire spinning into the air, dead sea creatures covering beaches, strange lights in the sky, a blood-red moon, an earthquake, deep sea life surfacing, and now fire on the water. Separately, each event fits within known processes. Together, they form a sequence that feels intentional. This is where the conversation shifts. Because when people start asking whether these events are connected, they are really asking a deeper question. They are asking whether the natural world is trying to communicate something. And if so, what? Science operates on cause and effect. It measures, predicts, explains. It does not assign meaning beyond mechanics, but humans are meaning-making creatures. We see patterns. We search for purpose. And when multiple disruptions happen close together, the instinct to find connection is not irrational. It is human. The challenge is distinguishing between pattern recognition and pattern creation. Are these events actually linked, or are we linking them because they happened near each other in time? The answer matters, because if they are linked, the question becomes what comes next. And if they are not, the question becomes why does it feel like they are? Either way, the feeling is real, the unease is spreading, and whether driven by environmental instability, prophetic significance, or both, something is shifting. The ground beneath our feet feels less stable, the sky above looks less predictable, and the question that nobody wants to ask out loud is becoming harder to avoid. What if this is only the beginning? The Bible does not predict every earthquake or wildfire, but it does describe periods when natural disasters increase in frequency and intensity. In Matthew 24, Jesus describes a time marked by wars, famines, pestilences, and earthquakes in various places. He calls them the beginning of sorrows. The phrase is specific, not the end. The beginning, like birth pains, they start slowly and build, each one stronger than the last, each one closer together. The pattern is unmistakable to anyone who has witnessed labor. Contractions do not happen randomly. They follow a rhythm that intensifies as the moment approaches. The imagery is deliberate. It suggests that certain kinds of disruption are not isolated. They are sequential, progressive, building toward something. In the book of Joel, similar language appears. The earth quakes, the heavens tremble, the sun and moon grow dark. These are not described as random acts of nature. They are described as signs, indicators that a transition is coming. Whether that transition is spiritual, historical, or both, depends on interpretation. But the pattern itself is consistent. Disruption in the natural world accompanies disruption in the human world. The book of Revelation expands this further. It describes seals being opened, each one releasing a new wave of upheaval. Earthquakes, darkened skies, stars falling, the sea turning to blood. Mountains and islands moved from their places. The language is symbolic, apocalyptic, layered with meaning. But beneath the symbolism is a clear structure. Things that seemed stable become unstable. What was hidden becomes visible. What was distant comes near. For centuries, theologians have debated whether these passages describe literal events or spiritual metaphors. The debate continues. But for people standing in the ash of a wildfire, or watching the ocean wash thousands of dead fish onto shore, or feeling the ground shake beneath them, the distinction between literal and metaphorical feels less important. What matters is the experience. And the experience is unsettling. Scripture also speaks to human response. In the same passage where Jesus describes these signs, he warns against fear. He says, "Do not be troubled." He reminds listeners that these things must happen, but the end is not yet. The instruction is clear: awareness without panic, observation without paralysis, recognition that the world operates under forces larger than human control, but that those forces are not chaotic. They follow a pattern, and patterns, once recognized, can be prepared for. The question is not whether storms will come, the question is whether we are ready when they do. That readiness is not just physical, it is spiritual. It is the recognition that stability in this world has always been temporary, that safety is not guaranteed by infrastructure or technology, that the ground can shake, the sky can darken, and the sea can rise, and none of it negates purpose. Throughout history, moments of natural upheaval have driven people toward deeper questions. Not just what is happening, but why. Not just how to survive, but what survival is for. And whether the events of recent weeks are the beginning of birth pains or simply a cluster of unrelated disasters, the effect is the same. People are paying attention, and what comes next will determine whether that attention leads to fear or to something else entirely. Across the country, cleanup continues. Tornado debris is cleared. Wildfire zones are assessed. Beaches are monitored. Seismic activity is tracked. Life returns to a version of normal. But normal feels different now. The sky is watched more carefully. The ocean is trusted less. The ground beneath our feet carries a new awareness. It can move. And when people talk about what happened, the conversations split. Some say it was a convergence of natural events, unusual but explainable. Others say it was a warning, clear and unmistakable. Both groups are looking at the same evidence, but they see different things. Because evidence does not interpret itself, it requires a framework. And the framework we choose determines the story we tell. If the framework is purely scientific, these events are data points: atmospheric pressure, seismic release, ocean temperature flux, all measurable, all predictable, within ranges. If the framework is spiritual, these events are signals. Reminders that creation operates under authority beyond human systems, that the natural world responds to forces we do not control. Both frameworks can coexist. Science explains how, faith explores why. And in the space between how and why, most of us live. We want explanations. We also want meaning. We trust data. We also sense pattern. We rely on forecasts. We also feel unease when the forecast is wrong. So, the question remains, was this random or intentional? A cluster or a sequence? A coincidence or a message? The answer may depend less on the events themselves and more on what happens next. Because if the pattern continues, if the intensity increases, if the birth pains grow closer together, the debate will narrow. At some point, the question shifts from whether something is happening to what we do about it. And that question does not wait for consensus. It demands response. The sky has changed. The ocean has spoken. The ground has moved. The pattern is visible. What comes next is not. At the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, analysts were reviewing something they had not seen in decades of combined experience. The data showed correlation without clear causation. Multiple systems failing or behaving erratically within the same compressed time frame. Atmospheric models had missed the tornado reformation. Fire behavior algorithms underestimated vortex formation. Ocean temperature predictions did not account for the sudden oxygen depletion. Seismic forecasts showed no unusual precursor activity before the earthquake. Each system had performed within normal parameters, but normal had not been enough. One senior meteorologist, speaking off the record, admitted that the clustering troubled him, not because any single event was unexplainable, but because the confluence suggested variables they were not measuring. He compared it to seeing symptoms without identifying the disease. Everything pointed to environmental stress, but the source remained unclear. Climate models were examined, historical records were pulled, researchers looked for similar clusters in the past century. They found isolated examples. A bad fire season followed by seismic activity. A harsh tornado outbreak during unusual lunar events. But nothing matched the density of what had just occurred. The events were not just close in time. They were geographically distributed, yet thematically connected. All involved elemental forces. Earth, wind, fire, water. All carried visual impact that transcended data. A red moon is a number on a spectrometer, but it is also an image that human beings react to emotionally. Fire tornadoes are fluid dynamics and thermodynamics, but they also look like judgment. The scientific community remained committed to empirical analysis, but privately, some acknowledged that public perception was shifting faster than research could address. People were not waiting for peer-reviewed studies. They were making sense of what they saw using the tools available to them. For some, that meant scripture. The Bible has described natural upheaval for thousands of years. It has connected cosmic signs with earthly events. It has used the language of shaking, fire, and flood to describe moments when the ordinary order is interrupted. Whether those descriptions were meant literally, metaphorically, or prophetically is debated. But their presence in the text means that humans have always associated natural disaster with deeper meaning. It is not a new instinct, it is an ancient one. And when modern systems fail to predict or prevent disaster, that ancient instinct resurfaces. The data could not be ignored, but neither could the reaction to the data, because while scientists worked to refine their models, another layer was being added to the story. This time, it was not environmental, it was technological, and it would raise questions that neither science nor scripture had fully prepared people to answer. It started in the Midwest. Rolling blackouts that were not scheduled. Power grids in 3 states began experiencing failures that engineers could not immediately diagnose. The outages were brief at first, a few minutes here and there. But as night fell, entire cities went dark for extended periods. Traffic lights stopped working. Hospitals switched to backup generators. Communication networks strained under the sudden load as millions tried to find out what was happening. Utility companies issued statements attributing the failures to unexpected demand surges combined with equipment stress from recent severe weather. Transformers, damaged by tornadoes, had not been fully replaced. Infrastructure weakened by fire was operating below capacity. The explanations were plausible, but the timing compounded anxiety. People who had just experienced natural disasters were now sitting in darkness, uncertain when power would return. In cities, the blackout revealed something many had forgotten. How much of modern life depends on electricity? Refrigeration stopped. Security systems failed. Water pressure dropped in areas reliant on electric pumps. For those without backup power, the nights grew cold and quiet. The hum of civilization disappeared, replaced by silence broken only by distant sirens. On social media, before phones began losing charge, theories spread quickly. Some claimed the grid was under cyber attack. Others suggested electromagnetic interference from solar activity. A few pointed to the earlier reports of strange lights in the sky and wondered if something had damaged infrastructure from above. Officials urged calm and reminded residents that grid failures, while inconvenient, were not unprecedented. Crews were working around the clock to restore service. Most areas would have power back within hours. But in the darkness, hours feel longer. And for people who had been watching the pattern build, the blackout felt like another piece falling into place. In the book of Exodus, darkness covered Egypt for 3 days. It was thick enough to feel, the text says, a darkness that could be touched. It was not an eclipse or a storm. It was described as a plague, a darkness that disrupted daily life and forced acknowledgement of forces beyond human control. In the New Testament, darkness covered the land when Jesus was crucified. From noon until 3 in the afternoon, the sun stopped shining. The event is recorded in multiple Gospels. Whether it was localized or widespread, natural or supernatural, it marked a moment of transition. Darkness in Scripture often precedes revelation. It represents the unknown, the hidden, the space between one reality and the next. When the familiar is stripped away, what remains becomes visible. For families sitting in dark living rooms, waiting for the lights to return, the experience was clarifying. They realized how fragile their sense of security was, how quickly comfort could vanish, how dependent they were on systems they did not control and barely understood. When the power finally returned, it came in waves. Some neighborhoods lit up, while others stayed dark. The uneven restoration highlighted infrastructure inequality. Wealthier areas recovered faster. Older grids took longer to stabilize. As screens flickered back to life and devices began recharging, people returned to the news, and what they found waiting was another development that would deepen the unease. Because while the lights were out, something had been happening in the sky that nobody on the ground could see. Space-based monitoring systems had captured something unusual during the blackout period. High above the affected regions, sensors detected electromagnetic anomalies that coincided with the power failures. The data was not classified, but it was technical enough that most people scrolling past headlines did not understand its significance. Researchers did. The anomalies showed bursts of electromagnetic activity in the upper atmosphere, not from solar flares. Not from known satellite interference. The patterns were irregular but intense. Some scientists compared it to the signatures left by high-altitude lightning, but the intensity exceeded normal ranges. Others noted similarities to electromagnetic pulses, though no source could be identified. What made the data remarkable was its timing. The bursts occurred minutes before the grid failures began, not after. Before. That sequence suggested the possibility, however remote, that the power outages were not caused by ground-level equipment failure. They might have been triggered by something affecting the grid from above. Engineers reviewed the possibility carefully. Electromagnetic interference can disrupt electrical systems. If strong enough, it can damage transformers and cause cascading failures across a network. The theory was sound, but it raised uncomfortable questions. If the interference came from the atmosphere, what generated it? Natural electromagnetic phenomena occur. They are rare, but documented. Ball lightning, sprite lightning, upper atmospheric discharge during severe storms. All can produce brief electromagnetic effects. But the recent weather had been clearing. No major storm systems were overhead when the anomalies were recorded. That left two options. Either the instruments had malfunctioned and recorded false data, or something had occurred in the upper atmosphere that existing models do not account for. Both options were uncomfortable. False data meant monitoring systems were unreliable. Unexplained atmospheric events meant there were processes happening above the planet that science had not yet characterized. As analysts continued reviewing the satellite information, another detail emerged. The electromagnetic bursts were not random. They formed a pattern, a sequence, almost like pulses. One researcher, speaking anonymously, said it looked deliberate, not natural. The comment was quickly walked back. Deliberate implied intention. Intention implied intelligence. And attributing intelligence to atmospheric phenomena crosses from science into speculation. But the word had been said, and once said, it spread. Online forums picked it up. Podcasts analyzed it. Videos broke down the satellite data frame by frame, highlighting the rhythmic quality of the bursts. For those inclined to see design in the chaos, this was further evidence. The earth shakes. Fire falls. The ocean rises. The lights go out. And above it all, something pulses in the sky. Scripture describes the heavens declaring the glory of God. It describes signs in the sun, moon, and stars. It describes powers in the heavens being shaken. Whether the electromagnetic anomalies were natural or significant, they added another layer to the story people were telling themselves. A story about a world that was not behaving the way it used to. And as that story spread, attention turned to the one group that had been warning about exactly this kind of moment for years. They had been dismissed as alarmists, fringe voices, doomsdayers, with websites full of speculation and Bible verses. For years, they had been posting videos about coming judgment, environmental collapse, prophetic timelines, the end of the age. Most people scrolled past them. Algorithms buried their content. Mainstream platforms flagged their videos as misinformation. But now, those same voices were being rediscovered. View counts on old prophecy videos surged. Channels that had been stagnant for months suddenly gained thousands of subscribers. People were going back through archives, looking for predictions that matched what had just happened, and they were finding them. Not vague generalities, specific descriptions. Some had talked about fire tornadoes years before they became headline news. Others had described earthquake swarms and unusual ocean behavior. A few had mentioned electromagnetic disturbances and grid failures in the same breath as blood moons and celestial signs. The specificity was unsettling. It was easy to dismiss someone predicting disaster in general terms. Everyone predicts disaster, eventually. But when someone describes fires spinning into the sky in a video posted 3 years ago, and then it happens, people pay attention. Critics were quick to point out confirmation bias. Thousands of predictions are made every year. Most are wrong. The few that align with events get amplified, while the failures are forgotten. It is a statistical inevitability that some predictions will appear accurate simply by chance. The critique was valid, but it did not stop the surge in interest, because people were not just looking for predictions, they were looking for frameworks, ways to make sense of what felt like chaos, and the prophecy community, whatever its flaws, offered a framework. It said that natural disasters are not random. They are part of a pattern, a sequence designed to get humanity's attention, to turn people back toward questions of meaning, purpose, and accountability. Whether that framework was true or not, it was compelling. It transformed isolated tragedies into a coherent narrative. It gave the suffering context. And in a world where suffering often feels meaningless, context is valuable. The Bible itself warns against false prophets. It says many will come claiming special knowledge. It instructs believers to test the spirits, to examine carefully, to avoid being led astray by every voice that claims divine insight. Discernment is commanded, not blind acceptance. But discernment requires engagement. It requires looking at what is being said and comparing it against both scripture and reality. And when reality starts resembling ancient warnings, discernment becomes more urgent. Some of the voices gaining attention were measured. They acknowledged uncertainty. They encouraged preparation without panic. They pointed to scripture without claiming to know exact timelines. Others were sensational. They declared dates. They claimed insider knowledge. They used fear to drive clicks and donations. Separating the two required wisdom that many people, newly awakened to the possibility of prophetic significance, did not yet have. The result was a swirling mix of truth, speculation, fear, and hope. And in that mix, something else was forming. A shift in collective consciousness. A recognition that the material world, for all its progress and technology, was not as stable as advertised. That forces beyond human control were still very much active, and that ignoring those forces did not make them disappear. It just made people less prepared when they arrived. Something changed in the days following the blackouts. It was not dramatic. No single moment marked the shift, but across the country, behavior began to change in small, measurable ways. Church attendance spiked. Congregations that had been shrinking for years saw unexpected crowds. People who had not attended services in decades showed up on Sunday mornings. Pastors described the atmosphere as different, less routine, more urgent. The questions being asked were deeper. Less about policy or preference, more about meaning and eternity. Online searches for terms like end times, prophecy, and Book of Revelation increased by orders of magnitude. Websites that had been niche suddenly struggled to handle traffic. Bible apps reported unusual download spikes. Bookstores saw runs on eschatology titles that had been gathering dust for years. Preparation took on new forms. Some people stocked food and water, treating the moment as a preview of further disruption. Others focused on spiritual preparation, confession, reconciliation, reordering priorities that had drifted. Still, others did both, recognizing that preparation is not just physical or spiritual, but integrated. At the same time, resistance formed. Opinion pieces appeared dismissing the renewed interest in prophecy as mass hysteria. Psychologists were quoted explaining how trauma drives people toward superstition. Commentators mocked the idea that ancient texts could have relevance to modern meteorological and geological events. The pushback was predictable, but it was also revealing. Because the intensity of the dismissal suggested that something significant was at stake. If the interest in prophecy was truly baseless, it would not require such vigorous refutation. The fact that major publications dedicated space to debunking it indicated that the conversation had moved from the fringe to the mainstream. People were not just talking about what had happened, they were asking what it meant. And that question, once asked broadly, is difficult to contain. Families who had not discussed faith in years found themselves talking about it over dinner. Co-workers who avoided religion at the office exchanged quiet questions during breaks. Online communities formed around shared unease and the search for answers. The shift was not universal. Millions of people continued, with routines unchanged. For them, the disasters were unfortunate, but not paradigm-shifting. Power had been restored. Cleanup was progressing. Life moved forward. But for a significant portion of the population, something had cracked open. A door they did not know was closed had swung ajar. And through that door came questions that could not be easily shut out. Questions like, what if the material world is not the whole story? What if there are forces, spiritual or cosmic, that operate beyond scientific measurement? What if the Bible was not just ancient literature, but something more? What if the pattern is real, and this is only the beginning? These questions did not have easy answers, but they were being asked, and the asking itself was significant. Because once people start questioning the foundations of their understanding, everything becomes open to re-evaluation. Security, success, purpose, legacy. What matters when the ground can shake, and the lights can go out, and the sky can turn red without warning? The shift was quiet, but it was real. And as it deepened, another event was forming, one that would eliminate any remaining ambiguity about whether the pattern was continuing. It happened on a Tuesday morning. Clear skies, calm winds, no severe weather anywhere on the continent. Then, the ground began to shake again. This time, it was not localized. Seismographs across multiple states registered activity simultaneously. Not aftershocks from the previous quake, new events. Multiple fault lines activating within minutes of each other. In California, a moderate earthquake sent people into the streets. In Nevada, tremors rattled casinos and stopped traffic on the Strip. In Oklahoma, where tornadoes had torn through weeks earlier, the ground rolled in waves that cracked foundations already weakened by storms. The timing was statistically improbable. Earthquakes can trigger other earthquakes along connected fault systems. But these events occurred across distances and geological structures that were not directly linked. Seismologists scrambled to explain the synchronization, stress transfer, delayed reactions to earlier seismic events, random coincidence. Each explanation addressed part of the pattern but not the whole. And then, as the shaking subsided, the sky darkened, not gradually, the way it does before a storm. Suddenly, as if something had passed between the earth and the sun. Observers described it as a shadow, but not from clouds. The darkness lasted less than a minute. Then, light returned, but different, dimmer, tinged with an amber hue that made everything look faded. Meteorologists reviewed satellite data. A large dust plume had been kicked up by the earthquakes and fires, thicker than earlier estimates. Combined with atmospheric moisture, it was scattering light in unusual ways. The explanation was plausible, but for people standing under a sky that had gone dark at midday, the explanation felt thin. Footage from the event spread instantly. Videos showed streetlights activating in the middle of the morning, car headlights switching on automatically, birds returning to roosts as if evening had arrived. Then, just as suddenly, the light returned. The images were eerie. They did not look apocalyptic in a Hollywood sense. They looked wrong. Subtly, but deeply wrong. Like reality had glitched. One video, filmed from a high-rise in Los Angeles, captured the moment the darkness fell. The cityscape visible 1 second, obscured the next, then returning with that strange amber tint. The video went viral within hours. Millions watched it. Thousands commented, and the comments revealed the shift. People were no longer debating whether something unusual was happening, they were debating what it meant. In the book of Joel, the prophet describes the sun being turned to darkness. In the Gospels, darkness covers the land during the crucifixion. In Revelation, the sun is darkened as part of the unfolding of divine judgment. The language is consistent. Darkness is not just absence of light. It is a sign, a marker, a moment when the ordinary is interrupted by something beyond normal processes. Whether the darkness that fell on that Tuesday morning was dust and atmosphere or something more, it functioned as a sign. Because after that moment, denial became harder. The pattern was undeniable, and the question was no longer if something was happening. It was what comes next. In the hours after the synchronized earthquakes and the sudden darkness, a different kind of conversation began. Not on social media, not in churches or news studios, in government buildings. Emergency management agencies across multiple states convened calls with federal counterparts. The topic was not disaster response, it was disaster prediction. Because if the pattern continued, if the intensity increased, the question was not whether another event would happen, it was when and what. FEMA officials reviewed resource allocations. Stockpiles of food, water, medical supplies, and emergency shelters were assessed. Many were still depleted from recent deployments. Replenishment was underway, but slow. If another major event hit before supplies were restored, response capacity would be compromised. The military was quietly briefed, not for combat, for logistics. The scale of simultaneous natural disasters across multiple regions was stretching civilian infrastructure. If the pattern escalated, military assets might be needed for transportation, communication, and security. Nobody used the word martial law, but the framework for it was being discussed. Local governments faced different pressures. Mayors and county officials were fielding thousands of calls from residents asking what they should do. Evacuate? Shelter in place? Stock up on supplies? The officials had no clear answers, because the threat was not specific. It was general, diffuse. How do you evacuate from a pattern? Public statements emphasized calm and preparedness. Residents were encouraged to have emergency kits ready, to stay informed, to avoid spreading rumors. But privately, officials admitted they were operating in uncertainty. The models they relied on were not capturing what was happening. And without reliable models, planning became guesswork. Some local leaders began reaching out to faith communities, not officially, quietly, asking pastors and religious leaders to help maintain calm, to provide reassurance, to offer the kind of hope that government communications could not. It was an acknowledgement, unspoken but clear, that the moment had moved beyond the purely material. People needed more than logistics. They needed meaning. And meaning was not something emergency management agencies were equipped to provide. As these conversations unfolded behind closed doors, the public remained unaware of the scale of concern. But they could sense it in the tone of news anchors, in the length of pauses before officials answered questions, in the way information was being released. Something had shifted, and the shift was accelerating.